Topping today's news, things got a bit heated as the Christian Council attended the University of the Bahamas Pride Forum on Thursday. The number of dengue fever cases in country increases. The Minister of Economic Affairs defending the government ministers who borrowed money on behalf of the government, and the Bahamas Chamber of Commerce not impressed with the government's new legislative agenda. Good evening, Bahamas. I'm Jarino Saunders. This is your JCN Evening News, and it is a pleasure to have you join us. It's a difficult situation, and if it were easy to deal with, the matter would have already been resolved. And that is the plight, as the Bahamas petroleum retailers are still lobbying the government for a change in the fixed margins for their fuel products, which are price controlled. Minister of Economic Affairs, Senator Michael Halkidis, says the government and the retailers are still in talks with a new idea that has to be hashed out.
And so we continue to talk. We had a brief conversation just before I left for the promotional tour, where an additional idea was sort of floated. We have to sort of hash it out. As I've said before, our position is we spoke about inflation and high prices today. The immediate effect of a margin increase would be higher prices at the pump, which will affect every single person in this room and everyone who owns a car. The government doesn't want to, be the cause of that just by something that we do. And so we continue the conversation. We ask them for forbearance. We continue to meet. We understand their plight. We're not unsympathetic, but we would just believe that, it would be counterproductive to, go with a margin increase at this time. There was some other issue that was, I can't talk about it now, but a suggestion that was made, we have to process it.
Just last month, the petroleum retailers noted that retailers and wholesalers were not easing up on demands for a margin increase. Retailers earned 54 cents per gallon on gasoline and 34 cents per gallon on diesel. The government, which sets the margin, earns $1.16 per gallon. Minister Halkidis says all involved continue to look for ways to bring relief.
If it might be, we have to just look at this whole issue of how we price from the wholesale level straight down to the retail level. We are hopeful that, the prices fluctuate daily in terms of the international market. They're down a bit, but again, that can change tomorrow. But I say all that to say, we continue to have an open mind, but our overriding consideration is, increasing the price at the pump directly would be counterproductive.
The price of gas has been steadily increasing. Asked whether Bahamians will continue to see a rise in prices, the economic minister says this.
Price at the pump, that is related to what's happening on the international market in terms of oil. Because how it goes is the wholesalers would purchase the product, the gasoline, and the gasoline, of course, is related to the price of oil, and then depending on what their cost is, a margin is added on top. So if costs go up, then you're adding margin on top of a higher cost. And so that's why I said a lot of it depends on what happens internationally. We are looking at the whole picture right now at the ministry. We're looking at ways, and hopefully in a few weeks I can be able to come and tell you about some changes in the way we do things. But I think we just need to look at this whole, system that we currently have. I don't want to say more than that right now, but unfortunately for the time being, we are, at the mercy of the international fluctuations.
Gas prices at all pumps across the capital are over $6, and in the Family Islands, it's even more than that. The Pride Week Forum held at the University of the Bahamas on Thursday evening promised to be a peaceful sit-in by the Bahamas Christian Council, but ended with verbal attacks between the panelists and the Christian Council. The forum focused on Black Bahamians and Black queer Bahamian identities in a modern Bahamas. Prior to the forum, President of the Christian Council, Bishop Delton Fernandez, said they would just sit in and record.
Very peaceful. Very peaceful. They simply, as the flyer said, are going to sit in.
It's not a protest.
Yeah, no, it's a sit in. We want to hear, because it's hard to respond to something unless you hear what is being presented. And what has happened is the university seemingly has become the catalyst to begin Pride Week. We don't think public funds, this is a public institution. It might be quasi-government, but it's public institution using taxpayers' money should be the place to push an agenda of a special interest group. And if it is a forum, if it is a place, a presentation for higher learning, there should also be an opposing position allowed in a presentation. All of the universities I went to, that was how it was done. That's how those platforms worked.
During the question and answer period, the discussion got heated, with members of the Christian Council shouting from their seats at panelists. Following the verbal altercation, members of the Christian Council were eventually escorted out by police officers. One of the panelists, an intersexual human rights advocate, Erin Green, called Bishop Fernandes' actions at the event disrespectful and childish. She says the event did not attempt to create a division between people and their faith.
That one of my rules is I always try to find and develop language that allows each side of the discussion to hold to their faith, to hold to their positions, while exploring other people's positions, while engaging empathy, right? And engaging with empathy. So we can work here, and it's been a successful practice. Something that's different from a lot of the advocacy we see in big cities in the US and Europe is that no one is trying to create a schism here between the LGBTI community and the wider community. Nobody's trying to create a schism between people in their faith, people in their church. We're calling for compassion, we're calling for empathy, and most of my work is distilled down to everyone has the right to a life free of violence. And so while you can hold your position that you don't agree with something, you also have to hold a boundary that your disagreement doesn't allow you to be violent towards someone. And also it calls you to recognize how violence operates and how you may be being violent even when you're not being physically aggressive towards somebody.
Bishop Fernandes also addressed critics who say the council has selective outrage. He says they should not paint the Christian Council with a brush that does not exist.
Sometimes in the use of language and the skill set that you have, you could paint a picture and say that we are picking this group. We protested carnival. Isn't that heterosexual?
Yeah.
Isn't that something where both parties can get involved? We felt it was wrong. So let's not paint a brush that does not exist. Let's not do it for the UN, let's not do it for embassies here, let's not do it for special interests. I want them to hear us clearly. We are not picking on anybody. We represent Christ. And we want the country to know we will stand for righteousness, whether it's heterosexual, whether it's homosexual, whatever sexual you are. We are here for the things of Christ. So I know they want to paint us with a brush that we are this way. There's so many things. Pastor Moxley would have done men's health. Tim and Harris would have done men's health last week. We spoke up and asked the situation that took place with the father and the child dying. There's so much the church is involved in, but whenever we touch your spot, that's when you try to paint us and villainize us. Please, we're smarter than that.
The Christian Council has plans on carrying out their own event in response to the UB Forum. Today, the Ministry of Health and Wellness released the latest statistics on the number of dengue fever cases in country. The Dengue Alert Dashboard, dated Thursday, October 5th, says there are now 180 confirmed cases of dengue fever in the country, up from 168 cases reported in the last alert on October 3rd. The dashboard also shows cases by island, with New Providence having 128 cases, Grand Bahama 49 cases, the Berry Islands, Eleuthera, and Exuma each with just one case of reported dengue fever. The dengue fever hotline is 802-1143, 802-1143. Again, officials are urging you to eliminate all mosquito breeding habitats and take precaution to avoid being bitten by a mosquito. Minister of Economic Affairs, Senator Michael Halkitis, responding to opposition leader Michael Pintard, who accused the government of being serial lawbreakers. His comments come as he says Deputy Prime Minister Chester Cooper and Minister of Transport and Energy Jobeth Colby Davis borrowed money without approval from the Ministry of Finance.
The law does not permit them to do that. The law did not permit the Minister of Housing to borrow $20 million from a Jamaican investor because she does not have the ability to borrow funds. That is reserved for the Minister of Finance. And speaking about not having the right to borrow, the Deputy Prime Minister just returned from Qatar, having borrowed some $70 million. He has no authority to sign such documents. Again, only the Prime Minister can sign loan documents according to the Debt Management Act. Serial law breakers.
Minister Halkitis, during the Office of the Prime Minister's weekly press briefing, declared that no laws were broken.
So we understand, how the law operates, and we comply with the law. When it's necessary to have everything completed and I's dotted and T's crossed, we comply with the law. I don't want to comment on that, directly because I wasn't there. But from time to time, DPM acts as Minister of Finance. But when the agreements are concluded, they will be executed properly.
So in response to the opposition leader who asserted that laws were broken.
It seems to be the opposition leader's, every time he gets up, he says laws were broken. No laws were broken. No laws were broken.
That was Minister of Economic Affairs, Senator Michael Halkitis. And finally, in this segment, one day after the new Parliament session began with a speech from the throne by Governor General Cynthia Pratt, Chairman of the Bahamas Chamber of Commerce and Employers Confederation, Crystal Rutherford Ferguson, in a written statement, is critical of the government's new legislative agenda. Mrs. Rutherford Ferguson says the Chamber appreciates the government's efforts in representing its new agenda. However, they are concerned over the lack of substantial support for the business community. She noted that collectively, the private sector employs the majority of the Bahamian workforce and is an important constituent in the economic health of the country. Mrs. Rutherford Ferguson says the Chamber acknowledges impending reforms to improve the Registrar General's office and the intellectual property legislation to protect creative industry. But regrettably, the government did not address other matters. She listed 7 areas of concern, including improving digitization across the government agencies, plans to reform the business tax system, and a national framework for public-private partnerships, including a public-private partnership unit. Mrs. Rutherford Ferguson also noted that the cost of energy is crippling too many businesses in the country, and so the Chamber of Commerce is keen to see what will emerge from the Ministry of Energy to alleviate this burden. She said the Chamber trusts that the government will consider their concerns and address them during this Parliament session. We'll take a break here. We'll be right back after these commercials.